French President Emmanuel Macron was in China for a 3-day state visit. He met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping with an aim to dissuade China from Russia's war in Ukraine. But things are not that simple as we look at it, especially with closer China-Russia ties. The bigger question that arises here is if Europe can persuade China to change course on the Ukraine-Russia war. To answer this and a lot more, we are now being joined by Colonel David B. Des Roches. He's a professor at Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University, and he's joining us live from Los Angeles. Thank you so much for joining us on Beyond, Colonel.
Thank you.
Now, for starters, in your viewpoint, do you think that Europe will be able to change Beijing's mind on the war in Ukraine? So far, China has maintained a neutral stance and has not condemned Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Rather, it proposed a 12-point peace plan, which has not been appreciated by the West.
Yeah, good question. So let me take those points backwards and work my way forward. So the 12-point peace plan, and indeed all peace plans proposed by Russia and China are unacceptable because what they basically do is amount to international recognition of Russia's land grab, Russia's colonization of its neighbor. So that's why Ukraine and the Western countries that support Ukraine have rejected that. The next question is, what can Europe do? It looks like Europe can't do much. And it looks like China isn't interacting with Europe, it's interacting with France. I think, we had the European Commission president accompanied Macron, but she was treated as a junior partner. She was, had a much lower reception. She didn't appear at any public events with Macron. Chairman Xi, publicly hung out with Macron and kind of ignored her. So I think what we're seeing is a France thing. Macron has form here. Back when Russia was initially massing its troops before the invasion a year ago, Macron flew to Moscow, met with Putin, and then kind of told everybody, I've got an assurance that this war isn't going to happen. I think he's trying to do the same thing now, and I think a large reason why he's doing it is France has historically seen itself as a major power broker in the world. I think another reason is he's got pretty serious demonstrations at home that he is proven unable to deal with. So it's a time-honored political technique. When you have problems at home, go abroad, try to elevate your status there.
Right, just to add to that, let's also talk about the timing of this visit. Why did the French president make this visit to China at a time when there are massive demonstrations against the pension reform bill back home?
Yeah, well, I think he looks weak. The protests are going on and on and on. There's not much that he can do or show that's been effective. And I think that, what he wants to do is change the subject. I think he wants to remind the French people that, he is a player on the world stage, and therefore they should respect him as a leader at home. And again, this is something that political leaders who have domestic issues, often resort to this technique. You go abroad, change the topic, show that you're treated seriously overseas, treated with respect and deference, and then hope that some of that translates into the domestic forum.
Right, absolutely, Colonel. Also, what is China's motivation at the moment? Why does China want to end the war in Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure they want to end the war in Ukraine. I think that they are kind of happy to see the establishment of, Russia establishing what looks to be a sphere of influence. Russia's idea that there needs to be a new security order that kind of recognizes Russia as the primary force in the region. That's something that China likes because they want to apply the same thing to East Asia. But I think that really what they're doing is trying to just divide the West. The one motivation for China to end this war is that Russia looks a lot worse than we thought it would. The Russian military is really underperforming what I thought they would do and what other military analysts thought. And I think people are now starting to say, well, if we got Russia so wrong, maybe we got China wrong too. So there is a sort of indirect thing. The longer this war goes on, Russia's prestige, of course, is diminish greatly, and possibly China's would be as well.
Right. Also, with China positioning itself as a mediator and Xi Jinping meeting a slew of world leaders, do you think that the latest meet between the two leaders was a part of Xi's growing expansionism?
I think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, Xi wants to be seen, as an important player. He wants to be seen as a power broker. He wants to be seen as somebody who you must deal with if you want to solve the intractable problems in the world. I think that it may have been in his power to delay the initial invasion of Ukraine so that the Winter Olympic Games that he was hosting wouldn't be overshined by the invasion. But I think that, like a lot of other people, Xi thought that Russia would very quickly succeed in achieving its aims in Ukraine. As the war drags on, Xi has been looking at other things, most recently brokering the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
If he could find a way to stop this, I think that would be a major feather in his cap.
Right, absolutely. Also, don't you think that for the Chinese President Xi Jinping, the optics are too good at the moment, with Europe's two major leaders coming to Beijing and talking to him?
Yeah, well, it is good. I mean, it always is good for Xi to, in terms of his own rules, say, look, all these important people in the world are coming to me. And I think that, he is probably portraying them as supplicants rather than as peers. And he's gotten a lot of concessions from Macron in exchange for very little. Macron reaffirmed France's adherence to the One China drill. Macron, apparently, his presence was seen as a sort of a something to be dealt with before China launched a very, very intrusive set of military drills around Taiwan, which I think no sovereign political entity would be able to accept. So, I think Xi kind of played Macron for a bit of a sucker here.
Right. I'm talking about Europe. It looks like Europe is kind of stuck in the middle between China and the United States. Help us understand, how did the United States of America react to this meet between Macron and Xi Jinping? We do know that Macron did have a phone conversation with Biden before departing for Beijing. But how is Washington reacting to the meet?
Well, I think we're still trying to figure this out. We kind of got our own issues here. So there are bigger news stories in Washington. We have a couple of domestic issues that are kind of taking over most of the airwaves. And then we also have this leak of military documents from the Pentagon, which is sort of in the front. So this is down the list a little bit. I think that, we're used to China playing a role, we're used to France playing a role that is viewed as perhaps less than helpful, going back to de Gaulle's presidency in the 1960s. France seems, from an American perspective, to be a small country that has big ambitions. It's not, it's larger than many countries, but it is not seen as big enough for its own ambitions. And I think that most Americans will just look at this and say, well, that's France. They always kind of are a little out there. They're always trying to make themselves seem to be more important than perhaps their actual presence in world politics and world security warrants.
Absolutely. Also, the language used against China and US and that in Europe are very different. Washington clearly labels China as an enemy, but we don't really hear that from Europe. So what kind of message does this send to Washington?
Yeah, I have to disagree with the premise of your question. Washington views China as a pacing threat. What that means, an enemy is somebody you face and confront. A pacing threat, you're facing the same directions, but you're concerned that they might turn on you. Right. So we don't see them as an enemy. Look, the reason why China is so powerful today is because Washington was in the lead of welcoming them into the international system and the international trade system. China built up economic strength and power because of their cheap labor costs primarily. Our hope was that political reform and development would follow that. It hasn't, and now there's a bipartisan consensus. And I think most Europeans share this as well, that China has really taken advantage of this and not been a true trading partner, but rather more of an exploitative partner, forcing things like technology transfer, dumping vital commodities like cement in order to, acquire market share. But Europe doesn't have the same security interests in East Asia that the United States does. The United States is the primary security partner of South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, Australia, and many of the other countries in there. Europe just doesn't have that same relationship, so I think it's a little bit natural that our perspective will lead to a different emphasis than the European countries.
Right, Colonel. My last question to you before we let you go. Do you think Europe is divided on the Ukraine war?
I think there are elements within Europe. Hungary is always an outlier, but I think that what you see is not so much division as you see different speeds. I think that everybody agrees that the Russian aggression is just unacceptable, has to be countered. The question is at what speed. So Poland, the former Warsaw Pact countries, very, very outspoken and have done all that they can do and more to try and do it. Then we see some other countries that perhaps are concerned about maintaining their stockpiles and their other global commitments. I think this is a problem of capacity, not a problem of political will.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us in WION, Colonel, and sharing your insights with us on this. Thanks very much.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.